In part one, Malcolm Douglas travelled through the Kimberley at the end of the dry season. He explored the most inaccessible region on four-wheel bikes, travelled overland to catch the fighting barramundi, and flew into the King George River by float plane. Then, during the monsoons, travelled by boat into spectacular gorges. Now the wet season over, he's on the move again. With months of perfect weather ahead, Malcolm drives north for the annual cattle muster on Mount Elizabeth Station. The ancient boab trees, symbol of the Kimberley, are dropping their leaves, a sure sign that the wet's over. The vivid colours so stark against the bright blue of the northern sky. Ahead sprawls Napier Range. It's really a massive barrier reef that formed around 350 million years ago, when all this land lay under the Southern Ocean. Over ages of geological change and weathering, the eroded remnants evolved, unique among the fascinating geological formations of the Kimberley. Fossils of immense scientific interest have been found in this petrified relic of an ancient seabed. Beyond Napier Range, the Gibb River Road winds through the King Leopolds and beyond into the gorge country. No other part of Australia is quite like the Kimberley. Water lily stems are an excellent bush food. Tasting like celery, they're a welcome addition when fresh fruit and vegetables have run out. This far inland, only the harmless freshwater crocodiles live in the billabongs. At Mount Elizabeth Station, Malcolm's mate Peter Lacey is flat out preparing for the muster. But first, his new yards have to be ready for the horse roundup. When Peter's father took up this country in the early 40s, the local tribe left the bush and settled into station life. Today's generation of skilled station hands help Peter run this huge property. Work starts early. Bread's baked fresh every other morning for the stockman, and Margaret's up before dawn kneading the dough. The baking's done in traditional camp ovens among the coals. The horses have to be run in and drafted before the cattle muster can begin. There'll be no break now for 2 months. Out in the house paddock, the horses are flighty after running free all through the wet season. They shy clear of the yards and only settle down when they're winded. The mob's coaxed and guided towards the gates. By the time the horses are yarded, the bread's ready for smoko. Mares and foals are drafted into one yard, the stock horses go into another, and the young stallions and unbranded mares are cut out. Colts not used for breeding must be castrated. A tranquilizer calms the animal. To an outsider, castration seems cruel and unnecessary. But stallions fight viciously and inflict terrible injuries on one another and the mares. Fat, liberally rubbed into the wound, stops infection. Horses must be branded by law. It's a sad fact that unscrupulous horse thieves still work the Kimberley. Within a few days, the geldings will recover completely. Without a brand, there's no way that ownership of an animal can be established. Peter loves his horses and accepts that this must be done. The stock horses are kept yarded for the muster. The others are freed to roam the bush for another year. Within days, the cattlemen are 50 kilometres from the homestead and the muster's in full swing. Today, helicopters are used. The chopper cowboys find the small mobs of cattle and quickly push them towards the horsemen. There are no fences out here. The cattle are wild and it's dangerous, exhausting work. The pilots with nerves of steel leave no room for error. But the helicopters cover in days vast areas that would take a team on horseback weeks to muster. The Aborigines are top stockmen, riding hour after hour in the heat, expertly cutting the cattle back into the mob. With skilled practice, the helicopter and the horsemen work together. The operation must be efficiently coordinated. It costs Peter $2,000 to keep a helicopter working for 8 hours. An old modified four-wheel drive vehicle, a bull buggy, pushes the most dangerous animals into the herd. There's always a chance that some of the wild Kimberley cattle, confronted by horses and men, will charge. Every season, stockmen are gored. As the numbers increase, the mob's urged along. A belly full of water helps settle them down. All day, the men keep the herd moving. Wild bulls are rounded up by buggy. It's the only way to control these animals. Pinned down, they're dehorned and castrated. Scrub bulls are vermin and have to be exterminated. If they're not caught, they're shot. Meals out here are pretty basic. Meat with bread or damper and a mug of tea. So every few days, Peter shoots a bullock. Malcolm cuts out his share of rib bones for the evening meal. At the end of the day, temporary yards are put up near a waterhole, and the team camps for the night. Even at the end of a long trek, some of the beasts are still flighty. The horses are hobbled and given extra food to stop them heading back to the house paddock. As tranquility descends over the camp, the men turn in early. They'll be on the go again before sunrise. In the nearby waterhole, Malcolm and his offsider trap a special treat: giant freshwater prawns called cherubin. They're superb eating. At sunup, the mobs let out of the night yards. It's always a tense time in case they break and get away again. The stockmen move off to rendezvous with a helicopter, and another long, hot day in the saddle should increase the herd by a few hundred head. At the end of the muster, the fat bullocks will be drafted off and sent to market, and the new season's calves branded. In his younger days, Malcolm worked on outback stations, and he loves the life in a stock camp. But now he's off to visit a special place on Gibb River Station before heading back to the coast. The last of the cherubin will do for the morning smoko. A hawker has set up at the Gibb River Station, and with an incredible array of goods, he's been trading with the locals. He's got hats of all sizes, and anything else you might want if you're a true bushie.
I don't like really big sound, but I like good sound.
Malcolm meets up with an old mate, Philip. Now that all the bush people have died, he's the custodian of the most important Wandjina site, Wanaliri. Malcolm's hoping to see it again, and Philip says he'll take him there. It's a 40-kilometre cross-country bush bash. Along the way, a frilled lizard attracts their attention. The colours in its frill are rich and vibrant reflection of the Kimberley ranges. Three hours later, they pull up at the edge of some rough breakaway country. Philip explains that the mythical beings, the Wandjinas, travelled this way, and their images can be found down in the gorge. This is the place, called Wanaliri. The rock shelter, about 70 metres long, is decorated with many of the finest Wandjinas in the Kimberley. These images record the most important Wandjina legend. The story goes that two boys pulled the feathers from an old owl and, mocking the bird, forced it to try to fly. The owl eventually called out to his father, the Sky Wandjina, who decided to punish the people. Their leader, Wandjin, called the Wandjinas together for a fierce battle, and all the people were killed. After the war, Wandjin stayed on here at Wanaliri. The other Wandjinas dispersed, eventually dying in caves all over the Kimberley. These caves became the sacred spirit places where the bones of the dead were interred. The legends have many variations, the meaning changing slightly with each generation of storytellers.
This one? No.
Before leaving, Philip cleans up the site, chipping away old wasps' nests.
A little bit slower.
The heat's stifling as they trudge back up the gorge to the bikes. It's weeks now since Malcolm left Broome, and it's time to go back and launch his boat before the strong southeast winds whip up rough seas along the coast. Every few years he explores the wilderness, monitoring the crocodile population to see if the numbers are increasing after 20 years of protection. At Broome, the boat's checked over, and they're soon on the road heading for King Sound. They camp that night at Derby Marsh, a wide salt pan famous for its boab trees and spectacular sunsets. Malcolm's planning to motor out to his favourite place, the Buccaneer Archipelago. Some of the biggest tides in the world sweep around the 800 remote islands. From the air, it's easy to follow the tortured coastline with its mangrove estuaries, sheltered bays, sandy beaches, and eroded shaggy cliffs. A wild place where only the most adventurous ever go. Trapped by the receding tide, they'll have to wait until late afternoon for the next high water. Here at the Derby Wharf, it rises and falls over 10 metres. And you can always find a few locals waiting for the right conditions to drop a net to snare the giant mud crabs. The first 50 kilometres north from Derby, the muddy shores are mangrove-lined, the water's dirty, and there's no indication of the dramatic country ahead. At sundown, they seek shelter to cook a feed. Steve Tucker, an expert seaman, is accompanying Malcolm again. Early in the morning, the wind drops and they travel 80 nautical miles on glassy seas before sunup. Malcolm manoeuvres between the reefs to reach a particular island, a primeval place. At one end, there's a high reef. As the tide drops, it's transformed into a cascade that stretches for a kilometre. This is another of the great scenic secrets of the Kimberley. The spectacular water show plays for hours. As the tide drops faster than the water can drain away, the waterfalls seem to loom out of the sea, until finally the lower reef itself is exposed. Within 6 hours, this high reef will be several metres underwater. For a few minutes before the tide changes again, the water clears, and it's an ideal time to snorkel. The most vividly coloured and intriguing species is the anemone fish. Living in small groups among the sea anemones, they're entirely dependent on their host for protection and immune to the poisonous stinging cells that kill other small fish. Each school of an enemy fish consists of a large female and one or more smaller males. If the dominant female dies, an extraordinary transformation occurs. The biggest male begins behaving like a female and within 2 weeks changes sex. The second largest male in the group becomes the reproductively active dominant male. Adults never have to leave the safety of their host. This anemone fish has the added protection of a giant clam. After the dive, there's time to collect a meal before the tide surges in again. It's impossible to leave until there's enough water to motor off the reef. In the turbulent currents, there's an abundance of fish, and it's just a matter of casting a line where the birds are feeding. One of the pleasures of this wilderness is the easy availability of fresh food. Heading north, their route takes them through the maze of islands off the coast. Malcolm's keen to experience again the incredible tidal forces at the entrance to Secure Bay. The massive rush of water through the narrow entrance erupts into whirlpools of awesome power. Studies have shown that in the future, the push of the tide here could be used to generate electricity. It's a controversial and complex issue in such a remote wilderness. But tidal power is a clean and unlimited source of energy. From Secure Bay, they motor off the coast to Montgomery Reef. It's now late in the afternoon. The tide's dropping and kilometres of rock seems to rise from the sea. This runoff is yet another amazing Kimberley phenomenon. The reef's so vast that the runoff continues until the tide rises again. These massive, poorly charted reefs and the powerful currents deter most boats from visiting this coast. Although a few charter boats are now following the well-mapped routes through the deep water. In the late afternoon light, there's an ever-changing kaleidoscope of vibrant, shimmering colour. Malcolm steers the boat to the rim of the reef to wait for high tide. At nightfall, they cautiously manoeuvre towards a mangrove island on top of Montgomery to spotlight survey for crocodiles. Veiled in darkness, it's an eerie place, infested with sharks. There are big crocs here too. And it's the first time Malcolm's seen them so far from the mainland. At sunup, the boat's stranded high on the reef. The tide only reaches here for a short time before receding again. And open water is far off over the horizon. There's little to do but air out the swags and put up some shade before it gets hot. The crocs, so obvious during the night, have now retreated deep into the mangroves. At midday, the tide surges swiftly across the sand flats. And Malcolm races back to the boat before he's trapped by the swirling water. At high tide, just for a short time, there's calm. Turtles in the protection of the trees browse on mangrove leaves. And Malcolm picks up a nice trevally before moving on to seek new adventures along this wild coast. Back at the mainland, they motor through the entrance to Doubtful Bay, a cliff-locked harbour of breathtaking beauty. Dominating the bay is Steep Island. At the base of a massive cliff, a thicket of green vegetation are signs of running water. Years ago, Malcolm was shown this spring by the last of the local Aborigines. At high tide, the fresh water's 3 metres under the sea. At the top of the cliff is a special place for the coastal Aborigines. An ideal wet season camp, the roof and walls are adorned with paintings, artistically and historically of great importance. This rock overhang, like a library, told the age-old legends to all who sheltered in the cave. During the dream time, the sea wanjinas, the guardian spirits of this territory, hunted and trapped stingrays, dugong and fish. The wanjinas and the creatures they hunted are shown here. Sadly, all the Aborigines left this country 40 years ago, and now that there's no one left to repair the images, they'll gradually deteriorate and fade, to disappear forever. Bonnie, hot and tired, waits patiently to move on. They stop to marvel at Steep Island, a huge monolith rising straight out of the sea. For the next day or so, the men travel north. Scattered all along the coast are beautiful islands with sheltered bays, white beaches, and weird rock formations. At Hall's Point, where the northwest currents converge, the water's usually rough. But today it's calm, and Malcolm's able to motor in close to the cliffs to see the naturally sculptured sandstone eroded by the elements into fantastic shapes. only settlement on this coast is the cultured pearl farm at Koori Bay, where Malcolm's arranged a petrol drop. With the boat refueled, they're on their way again. Ahead, whales. Recent arrivals from the Southern Ocean. During the past few years, humpbacks have been sighted off the Kimberley coast again. They're migrating north from the Antarctic winter to the warmth of their tropical breeding grounds. Heavily exploited, their numbers were reduced to less than 3,000. The population's now increasing since protection in 1963. Showing no fear of the boat, they can be watched for hours. In need of clean, fresh water, Malcolm swings into Camden Harbour and finally into a narrow inlet. At the end of the gully is fresh running water. Away from the sea breezes, the heat's oppressive. The tide recedes so quickly the men are trapped. There's no chance of motoring out until well after dark. So there's time for a meal. The incredible drop in water level can be clearly seen when Bonnie and Malcolm head up the bank to the campfire. Another week finds the men far from the open sea, deep in the Prince Regent River, motoring towards the King's Cascades. A roosting colony of black flying foxes is disturbed by the passing boat. To many people, fruit bats are ugly, but close up they have delicate, appealing features. Thousands of bats squawking and scrambling to a higher vantage point is an eerie sight. As the fruit bats become more agitated, their raucous shrieks are deafening. A small inlet opens out to reveal an enchanting scene. King's Cascades. Named after the Australian marine surveyor Philip Parker King in 1820 when his crew rowed up the river looking for clean water. Fed by permanent springs, it flows continuously. This year, with few monsoonal storms during the wet, the overflow's reduced to only a steady stream. But once after a cyclone, Malcolm visited the Cascades and they were truly spectacular. Whatever the season and whatever the time of day, this is always a beautiful place.
Yes, the King's Cascades. It is a beautiful place. But it's also a sinister place because just on 4 years ago, right beside me here, just between the boat and the mangroves, was where Ginger Meadows, the American girl, was taken by a large crocodile. She was on a boat that was being taken from Perth back around to the eastern states, and she'd jumped on board as crew. And when they got to the Prince Regent, they came up here, and on board they had an advertising brochure for another charter boat, and they had people swimming below the Cascades here. So they assumed that they could swim here too. They had the main boat out in the actual river. They had the dinghy anchored just here, and they were swimming around. And what happened was the tide was coming up. They were trying to get up onto this ledge, and somebody up the top of the falls saw the crocodile. They called out. The two girls, there were two of them, jumped onto that ledge, but by this stage, they're about waist deep in water. Ginger panicked. She jumped off the ledge, tried to swim across to the high ground here on my right, and of course the crocodile came in and took her, and sadly, she was killed. Before she was taken, very few people had ever heard of the King's Cascade, but after Ginger Meadows was taken by the croc, the King's Cascade was known throughout the world. And now, charter boats regularly come up here, but whatever you do, don't ever swim around here or in fact, on any of the waterways, from here right round to Townsville, because all this is crocodile country. And at any time, at any place, you could get taken.
From the safety of a rock ledge, Malcolm checks for crocodiles, intrigued to see if their visit has attracted the killer. But the only croc enjoying the afternoon sun is too small to be dangerous. The following morning, the men are on the move again, heading south towards the horizontal tidal waterfalls of Talbot Bay. Ten nautical miles from their destination, a high reef bars the way. The runoff drains the reef hours after the tide has receded. A good indication that fish will be trapped. They're on the bite, and Malcolm lands two for a meal just as the tide changes. While waiting for high water to cover the reef, lunch is prepared. Strips of raw fish are soaked in onion and vinegar with a touch of curry and marinated for 30 minutes. It tastes great. The 10-metre tide rushes into the sunken valleys, creating what Malcolm believes is the most visually stunning scenic wonder in Australia. And it's locked away on this remote coast. Good local knowledge is essential to find the entrance by boat. The openings into the last two bays are very narrow. The second, a mere 15 metres wide. It's a wild ride through. Rich ochre-coloured rocks contrast vividly against the glittering sea. Malcolm's been drawn back to Talbot Bay many times. His films and photographs taken here have created more interest and comment than any other place he's ever visited. The rushing water builds to a deafening crescendo. From the top, it's even more impressive. In the future, this region will be one of the great tourist destinations of Australia. But Malcolm believes that it must first be designated a wilderness area. The churning water's dead calm for just a few minutes. Then it drains out again. At sundown, the colours in the ranges are even more intense. In the morning, after motoring back into the first bay, Malcolm indicates to Steve the limit of the tidal rise. The seawater stains the sandstone up to the high water mark. Along the edge, brain coral gleams like gold. The coast reveals an amazing range of ecosystems, from its ancient mountains and brilliant sandstone cliffs to the reefs and coral swept by the spectacular tides. This is what always brings Malcolm back to the Kimberley. But after living in a boat for a month, it's time to head back to Broome, where he has more work to do at his crocodile park.
Well, that's my country. And I'm sure that you enjoyed seeing it as much as I do. It's a tough, wild region, and for me, it's the best part of Australia. And I know that one day you'll want to visit the Kimberleys, and that'll be good. You'll be most welcome. But please, look after the country. It's our most precious asset.